next time because that would be very helpful. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Those of you joining us on Zoom, yes, you can hear me. I'm gonna sit back here because I'm gonna be like showing you the bones from this box and then like showing them on the camera. So I'm probably gonna have to unblur. But we're gonna be covering the lab practical 2 material. So exercises covered, these are going to be from your worksheets. It's going to be 7 through 11. So the integumentary system, which is your skin and all of its derivatives. Exercise 8 is just overview of the skeletal system. We have the axial skeleton, appendicular, and then the fetal skeleton. So the first thing is the integumentary system. These 3 images are going to come up on the exam, but you're going to want to pay attention to what the question is asking because, for example, this one in the middle, this second one, is pointing at the specific cells of the epidermis. And then the one on the very end is asking for the different layers of the epidermis. So specifically as well, I know there's a model that they use in the lab. We don't have that specific one, but we do have the purple one back here. They also use, but since we're taking, my class that's in here is taking their exam in about an hour, let's go ahead and try to name these here as much as we can see. So number 1 is right here, and it's just pointing to these little pores that are on top right here. Do we know what that is? Sweat pore, good. So number 1, sweat pore. Number 2, I can barely see them. It's this right here. Then we know what that is. Hair shaft, good. Number 3 is this layer here. Epidermis, good. Number 4 is right underneath that. Yeah, the dermal papillae. There's no number 5. Number 6. Oh, can you see that? Are these little extensions? Anybody know what those are? Sebaceous oil glands. Oh, I should probably be pointing up here. Hello. Can you all see that? Oh yeah, I can see my mouse. Okay. Number 7. Do we know what those are? Number 7, these are the lamellar corpuscles. Number 8, where are we? Down here. So number 8 is not this whole structure down here. It's going to be the little receptors that are on this structure. Do we know what those are? Yes, those are the hair follicle receptors. Number 9. Hello, number 9. Number 9 down here, it's another layer. Yes, the hypodermis. Does anybody know what is like what the hypodermis composes of? Adipose, yeah, fat. So adipose fat tissue. 10, where are we? Over here. Number 10 is going to be the hair follicle. And then number 11 is down here in this area. I think I found this. There we go, over here. This is going to be the hair root, number 11. Number 12 is going to be this one right here. This is going to be the beginning of the dermis. And then 13 and 14, you're going to want to pay special attention to because they usually ask about these. 13 is right here. You guys probably can't see it, but it's an eccrine sweat gland. And then 14 is this big, the erector pili muscle. So make sure you are comfortable with filling out, I turned it over the whole time, with going through this specific image because it will show up on your exam. Next, we have these cells of the epidermis. Again, you're going to want to be able to identify these. Does anybody know what number 1 is? I know it's really hard to see. Keratinocytes, good. Number 2, dendritic cell. Yeah, number 2 is pretty easy to identify because it has that like odd shape. Number 3, melanocyte, good. And number 4, good. The Merkel or tactile cells, and then you're going to want to know the function of each of these. Melanocytes, keratinocytes, the Merkel cells, and then the dendritic cells. And then lastly, you're going to have to, not me, y'all will have to identify the different layers of the epidermis. So this first layer, it does start with the C. Does anybody know what it is? Corneum, yeah, the stratum corneum. This is also the layer, I know specifically Mr. Torres said it, they call it the horny layer. These cell layers are composed of dead cells. And then this layer is usually about 20 to 30 cell layers thick. This second layer here, the stratum granulosum, 1 to 5 layers. Layer 3, spinosum, good. Stratum spinosum, this is the prickly layer. This is where you can find keratinocytes as well. And then the last one, 4, stratum basal, yes. The deepest epidermal layer, this is also where we have cells that are mitotically active. So that's something you're going to want to know for your exam. And then one layer that we did talk about but is not labeled on here is the stratum lucidum. It's found between the corneum and the granulosum layer. So when you, or on your exam, if you need to like throw a Hail Mary and just remember literally anything, the acronym for like superficial to deep is covers like a good blanket. Covers like a good blanket, yeah. So stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, stratum basal. Covers like a good soft blanket. I forgot one. Good soft blanket. Yeah. Come, let's get sunburned. Come, let's, oh, that's a good one too. Come, let's get sunburned. And then it's kind of cut off down here, but some of the questions that could be asked is like, which cells of the epidermis produce a water insoluble protein that coats the skin? I think that says. Which cells of the epidermis produce a water insoluble protein that coats the skin? Keratinocytes, yeah. So again, just be prepared to answer, not only label, but answer like short answer questions. Okay, and then quickly, or not quickly, I want to spend most of the time on bones because I know that's kind of what everyone's timid about. So types of questions to be asked. What are the functions of the skeletal system? This is exercise 8. Protection, storage, there's movement, support, yeah. So any of those, I would know about maybe 2 of them, have those in the back of your brain. You're gonna need to know the types of bones. So there's long, short, flat, and irregular. What is an example of, give me 2 examples of a long bone. Humerus, femur, good. Those are like the 2 big ones, no pun intended. And some of like 2 of the easiest to remember. 2 examples of short bones, specific examples. Tarsals, what's a specific tarsal? Navicular, good. And then another example. Someone give me one from the hand. Oh, I'm sorry, I pointed in your face. Sorry? The lunate, yeah. So we'll go through the tarsals and carpals in a bit, but short bones are usually any of your, what are they called? Bones of the ankle and then bones of the wrist. 2 examples of a flat bone. Clavicle, yep, and then one more. Sternum, I heard it, yeah. Another thing that students get confused on is the skull is an example of a flat bone as well. Because if you take all the bones apart, they're pretty flat. When they're all together, it doesn't really seem like it would be a flat bone, but it is. And 2 examples of irregular bones. Vertebrae, and one more. Your oscox or your coxal bone, that's an example of an irregular bone. Let me see. This is your oscox. A lot of students get confused because when they just see this, they're like, I don't remember what bone that is. We did not cover it. When we get there, this is just one part of your pelvis. It's one side of it. So make sure you know that your pelvis is made up of 2 oscox and your sacrum. Let me unblur myself. And then some examples or types of questions that would be asked are like sternum and many skull bones are example of a blank bone. What would be the answer here? Flat bone, good. Okay, you also need to know the bone landmarks. These are prominent features on bones that serve as a reference point for anatomical orientation, muscle attachment, and joint articulation. You're going to want to make sure you know the specific landmarks, especially when we get to the next exam. When we get to muscles, it'll ask you like to name the muscle and then identify what the attachment point is on the bone. So we have different types of landmarks. We have fissures, foramen, tuberosities, crests, trochanters, lines, tubercles, etc. There is a lot, and you're going to want to make sure you write the whole name of the landmark. So, for example, the foramen magnum of the skull, which is this one down here. It's the really big hole at the bottom of the skull. If you just wrote foramen or if you just wrote magnum, that would be wrong because it's not really describing what it exactly is. It's the foramen magnum. And the landmarks also just describe what the bone is or what it has. So, question, what bone is the only bone that has the presence of a trochanter? Femur, yes. So this is going to be a question on the exam. The femur is the only bone that has a trochanter present at all, but the femur has 2. It has the greater trochanter and the lesser trochanter. And then these are attachment sites for muscles. So make sure you know, I think last semester on the exam, it was asked like, name the bone that has trochanters present, the femur. And then it will also ask you to identify one of the, or maybe even both of the trochanters. And then these are just some of the images that you need to be familiar with. This one was in your worksheet, so I'm not going to go over this one, but you do need to be comfortable with it. And then also the model of compact bone. This will show up on the exam. Where's this going? So this whole structure here is an osteon. And these like rings are the lamellae. We also have our osteocytes here. And then the Volkmann and perforating canal. I know Mr. Torres touched a lot on the Sharpie's fibers here, so I would make sure you know those. Oh, okay, there we go. And then you also need to be really comfortable with axial and appendicular. So what they can do on the exam is give you a scapula, a clavicle, and 1 oscox, and ask you to identify which division of the skeletal system that it comes from. So you're going to want to be able to know which specific bones belong to which division. There we go. Oh, that was supposed to come up a long time ago. So again, this is like a superior view of the model of compact bone. The periosteum is that outside layer, circumferential lamellae or lamella, spongy bone, compact bone, the central canal. These are just some of the things that are usually asked on the exam. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. You want to go back and take a picture? Yeah, sorry. Okay. Okay, then we get into the axial skeleton. So the axial skeleton is your midline. So that's going to be your skull, your vertebrae, your sacrum, and then So from the axial skeleton, the skull is a big one that you need to know. I try to find like really good pictures, but it's actually kind of hard when it doesn't have enough information or too much information. So I know this looks very intimidating, but just stay with me here. So like it does have some extras. You don't necessarily, I don't believe you need to know the names of the sutures for the adult skeleton just yet. That's going to come in your next exam. So again, we have the frontal bone, which is like your forehead area. Parietal bones on the side. So if you remember when we talked about like the parietal and visceral serosei, parietal means wall. So it's like the walls of your skull. I did put this image, which I know it's kind of hard to see when you're far, but because it has a lot of the foramen labeled. So right, this is your orbital socket. So right above that, we have the supraorbital foramen. So it's just breaking down a lot of the big words, and it describes to you exactly what it is. Your sphenoid bone is your, like the wings, we talked about that. It's back here in your eyes, and then also over here when you're looking at it inferiorly. Temporal bone on the side. We have our zygomatic bone, which are your cheekbones. Again, I'm going to try not to use any of the common terms because if you put those on the exam, it's probably going to be wrong. So zygomatics. We have our maxilla here and our mandible. Your mandible is your jaw. Let's see what else. Oh, down here, these mental foramen, they usually ask about, they're the little holes down here on your mandible and your jaw. Make sure you know this. They are here. Sometimes they just kind of look like somebody broke it or somebody like chipped it or something, but they are actually holes in your mandible. And then when we get there, the mentalis muscle attaches here. So mental, mentalis. Yeah, the supra and infraorbital foramen. Let's see. Your lacrimal bone is also sometimes asked. Let me see if this works. It's this one in here. Lacrimal is like right here in your skull. So it's like the cry, where your tears come from, cry button. And then there's one more I was going to talk about. It'll come back to me. Okay, so then when we look at it superiorly, here again is your like maxilla area. And then we have our palatine bone, which is this green one here. They usually ask something about the palatine bone, so I would know that. Right underneath that or like attached to that is your vomer. It's kind of hard to see on the anterior skull. So we're looking at it here, vomer. Again, this whole tan bone is your sphenoid bone. Because I would be prepared to label the sphenoid bone, like identify it, because it's one of those that they talk about and it is kind of hard, so they do put that on there. Again, here's your zygomatic, sphenoid, and then your temporal is over here. Your occipital is back here. And then we have our occipital condyles. What structure attaches or articulates with the occipital condyles? Atlas, good. Okay, and then we get into the foramen. So again, what is this big hole here? Foramen magnum, good. So foramen magnum literally translates to big hole. So make sure you know that. It's usually asked. We have the foramen lacerum here, which again, hard to see. Right here is your foramen lacerum. Foramen ovale or oval is oval shaped. Right here. The foramen spinosum is super tiny and it's in here. We have our carotid canal. And then our jugular foramen. And then our mastoid foramen. So I just realized we didn't go over the mastoid process because you can't really see it on the skull. That's this one right here. And then not underneath that, but kind of close to it is the styloid process, which is here. This is a attachment point for different muscles. So you're going to want to make sure you know styloid process. Styloid process of the skull, and then mastoid process. And then again, this would be your frontal, your two parietal bones, and then your occipital is back here. Any questions on the skull? See, I'm not entirely sure because like on the review, there wasn't any questions like that. Like, are you talking about the cranial nerves? Yeah. I know some students studied a lot of those, but I've never seen them come up on this exam. But I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, more into like the vascular system.
Yeah, we cover that a lot the very last exam. Okay, so continuing on with the axial skeleton, there's one specific bone in the entire human body that does not articulate with any other bone. We call this the free-floating bone. It's your hyoid. Do not get this bone confused with your vertebrae. It is not a vertebrae. So your vertebrae are posterior. Your hyoid is up here, anterior. And then you can see it kind of sits like right above your thyroid. So hyoid is really cool. It has a lot of attachment points for muscles. We have the stylomylohyoid that's getting its muscles, but there's a lot of things to know with this. Additionally, put a star, write this down, your auditory ossicles. These are the smallest bones in your body. And they're called ossicles because they're super tiny, that we really don't count them as bones, but they technically are bones. That's the malleus, incus, and stapes. So we don't actually identify these by like what they look like until we get to the special senses. But you do need to know malleus, incus, and stapes. Okay, and then vertebrae, this is where a lot of students are getting a little caught up with. We have 3 types of vertebrae and 24 total that make up our spine, right? This is not counting the sacrum and coccyx. Those are structures that are fused vertebrae, but they're not independent vertebrae. Or if you haven't grabbed the little cheat sheet that's in the front, I kind of wrote down all of the numbers that you need to know for the exam. So we have cervical, which are our thinnest vertebrae, and those are at the very top. There's 7 of them. And then we have thoracic, there's 12 of them. And then lumbar, there's 5. So let's see, okay. So of the 3 vertebrae, or the 3 types of vertebrae, 7, 12, and 5, we eat breakfast at 7, lunch at 12, and dinner at 5. That's how you remember them. So with the cervical vertebrae, or actually all of the vertebrae, you only need to know whether they're cervical, thoracic, or lumbar. You don't need to know C3, C4, T7, L3, but you do need to know C1 and C2 by name. So this is the atlas and then the axis. These are the only 2 vertebrae that have specific names because they're super important. Remember when I was talking about the skull, the occipital condyles, and they have the little attachment point here. This is where the superior articular facets articulate, and then that is what is holding up the weight of your skull. So because this bone right here is holding up the entire weight of the skull, we have the axis, which has this odontoid process, or it's just called the dens, and it's providing extra support for the atlas. So how do you remember which one is C1 and which one is C2? Atlas, AT, comes before axis, AX. So atlas is C1, axis is C2. It's going 100%, these will be on the exam, so make sure you know this. I believe they usually try to, not trick you, but just see if you studied. They put the C1 and the C2 with the hyoid, and they ask you to identify the three. So make sure you know the hyoid is not a vertebrae. It's a completely different structure. There is some, okay, so with these two, they are cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae are the only vertebrae that have specific holes for vertebral arteries. These are called the transverse foramen. So again, if you get a specific, what are they called? Vertebrae on the exam, and it has these holes right here, transverse foramen, then it has to be a cervical vertebrae. Every single vertebrae has a vertebral foramen, which is the big hole in the middle. That's where your spinal cord flows through. And then, so we go all the way from C1 to C7, T1 to T12, and then L1 to L5. After that, we have our sacrum and our coccyx. I can't see it. There we go. So the sacrum and the coccyx make up the remaining bones of the axial skeleton, and it is like the finale of your vertebral column, right? So you have 24 vertebrae, and then your sacrum, and then your coccyx. The sacrum is 4 to 5 fused vertebrae. Coccyx is just kind of there. It gets broken a lot. And they usually curve to allow you to sit, like you can see here. Any questions? I do have another, I believe, picture. Let's see. What does this take me?
How they're differentiating structures, right? Like you told us for the transverse foramen, the cervical. For the thoracic, we do the facets, right? The costal facets.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
Then for the lumbar.
The lumbar just has a super thick body. That's really the only way I can distinguish it. Yeah. And they're super wide right here because they're holding up all of the rest of the vertebrae. So when you have a disarticulated skeleton, all of the vertebrae, unless there's like an underlying disease, they fit really nicely on each other, and it's really satisfying to put it all together. So why do we think we have only 12 thoracic vertebrae? Because there's 12 ribs on each side. So each of the thoracic vertebrae have costal facets on the back that allow for articulation with the ribs. So this is why we call it the thoracic cage, because if you can see back here, all 12 vertebrae articulate with the 12 ribs. All, yeah. So big thing you need to know are the number of ribs. Again, it's on that cheat sheet. 1 through 7 are your true ribs. This is because they articulate with the sternum directly through costal cartilage. So we have rib, costal cartilage, and then sternum. That is what dictates ribs 1 through 7 as true ribs. Ribs 7 through 12. So 7 through 12 are all false ribs. Not 7 through 12, 8 through 12, sorry, typo. 8 through 12 are false ribs. Specifically, 8 through 10, they do articulate with the sternum, but they go, how do you say it? They have rib, costal cartilage, that attaches to the costal cartilage from rib 7, and then attaches to the sternum. So it does not directly, it's not like a clear path. It's rib, costal cartilage, sternum. So again, 1 through 7, true ribs, rib, costal cartilage, sternum. Rib 8 through 10, sorry, are rib, costal cartilage that attaches to the costal cartilage from rib 7, and then the sternum. And then 11 and 12 are still considered false ribs, but we more directly call them floating ribs because they don't attach at all. So they're back here. They're usually pretty tiny. and those are here. So this will be asked on the exam. Make sure you know it's 8 through 12, not 7 through 12. That is my fault. And then you do also need to know specifics from the sternum. So I do have some arrows there, but I pulled it out. This is that costal cartilage I was talking about. This is your sternum, but it has 3 different landmarks, I guess you could call them. This first one, or that top arrow, the pink arrow, is your manubrium. What happens here is there's like a clavicular notch, and this is where your clavicle articulates. This long part is the sternal body, but I'm pretty sure they just accept sternum. That's usually what they do. And then this bottom portion, or that red arrow, is the xiphoid process. You will need to know all 3 of these. So manubrium, sternal body or sternum, and then xiphoid process. Sometimes in like old people, mostly old men, if they have like a cough that never goes away, sometimes their xiphoid process is like tickling them all the time because it gets long. These are sometimes bifurcated like this one is, which means it has like 2 parts to it. But yes, you do need to know all of these. Again, they're divided here with the arrows, and then knowing the specific ribs. And then this is just another image of a thoracic vertebrae. You will want to know the spinous process for each of the vertebrae. It's always that same projection. This is the part of your spine where if you like run your hand over your own spine, you can feel it. The body is sometimes referred to as the centrum. The transverse process here is part of the vertebrae. Again, attachment point. Let's see, we have our superior articular process up here. We also have an inferior articular process. I don't know if I'll have a thoracic vertebrae in here. Yes, we do. So superior articular process and facet, inferior. And then a lot of students get confused with the lamina and pedicle. So lamina is going to be this part here, kind of around or near the spinous process. The pedicle is around the superior articular process. Okay, now we're moving into the appendicular skeleton. So appendicular, think appendages. It's everything not in your midline. So we already talked about the clavicle that articulates with the scapula. The scapula articulates with the humerus, which is your first arm bone. And then the humerus articulates with the radius and ulna, and then you have your hand bones. So quick rundown of that. Clavicle, you just need to be able to identify that it's a clavicle. Don't write collarbone, it's a clavicle. The scapula gets a little more difficult. So this one on the left-hand side is anterior. This is going to be the posterior view. The best way to side a scapula is to look at it posteriorly, in my opinion. So this would be the anterior view. If you look at George, the skeleton back here, you can't really see his scapula, but it's back there, and this is technically an anterior view of his scapula. If we were to turn him around, we would be able to see more of the infraspinous fossa, and that would be the posterior view. So if we're looking at George, we can't really see his scapula, but if I were to take this one here, and I'm looking at it anteriorly, if I want to side it, I need to hold it anterior, grab the spine, and put it on myself, and I know that this is a left scapula. Because the spine has to face towards the outside or the back, and then the glenoid fossa, which articulates with the head of the humerus, has to point out. If I tried to put this on my right side, my humerus would be where my spine is. If I try to put it this way, this coracoid process does not go to the back. So you need to, on the exam, if there's a scapula and they ask you to cite it, pick it up and put it on yourself and make sure it makes sense. So again, this would be that anterior view, which is what you guys are looking at right here. This is that coracoid process. It should be like super or deep in your body. So this would be deep, whereas the spine would be, I guess, superficial. Big thing to know is the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. They'll accept both. We have the lateral and medial border. So again, lateral, medial border. Actually, yeah. We have, let's see, I'm trying to see what would be important. The supraspinous fossa. Make sure you know that. The spine, and then the acromion up here. Again, so if we have it posterior like this, you can still see that coracoid process here or here. And then lateral border towards the outside, medial towards the inside. So make sure you know how to side the scapula. This will be super important for the next unit. Okay. Oh, I didn't change the top. So then we move into our arm bones. So we have on the, over here, our humerus, radius, and ulna. You can see that the radius and ulna, they twist over each other. We just talked about it in class today. That's for supination and pronation. These twist over each other. More importantly, what you need to know are the landmarks. So again, it's hard to see. We have the head of the humerus. We have, let me pull. So we have two fossas on the humerus, and a lot of students get confused. There's one that's called the coronoid fossa and one that's called the olecranon fossa. The olecranon fossa articulates with the olecranon process of the ulna, and that's what creates your elbow joint and why that's like really hard. So your elbow is not an actual bone, it's two bones meeting together. So the head of the humerus, this is going to be the first one, the coronoid fossa. And then if you turn the humerus posterior, this is the olecranon fossa because the ulna sits in here and allows you to bend. Again, you'll have to cite the humerus. You always want to put the olecranon fossa to the back, and then you would know that this is a right humerus. If we tried to do it this way, the olecranon fossa would be in the front, and that would not allow any bending. If we tried to do it this way, the humeral head would be lateral, and then that would just not be correct because it has to sit inside the scapula like this. I don't think this is correct, but you get the idea. So the humeral head has to sit medial, whereas the glenoid fossa of the cavity has to sit laterally. Again, towards the inside of your body to allow you to bend. And then we have some epicondyles, so medial and lateral epicondyle. Again, it's just describing them. We have the capitulum and the trochlea, or trochlear notch, because then it articulates with the trochlea. I hope I have them. So a lot of students get the radius and ulna confused. Radius has a circle at the top, like in math, when you take the radius of a circle. The ulna makes a U. Both of these have styloid processes, which is what you need to know. Styloid process. I don't know on the exam if they'll have you do like styloid process of the radius, styloid process of the ulna, but styloid process should suffice. And then this is that olecranon that I was talking about with the ulna that allows you to do this. But yeah, ulna, radius. And then we get into the hand, which I think is really fun, but I don't think most students think it's fun. This is kind of hard to learn when you're just looking at the bones, but just because the names are kind of hard. But there is an acronym. So long to pinky, here comes the thumb. So we are looking or holding our hand anterior, because remember, when you're in anatomical position, your palm should be facing forward. So this is looking at a left hand here. So long to pinky, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum. Pisiform are really tiny, and a lot of the time they end up fusing to the triquetrum, but it's there, the pisiform. Here, hamate, comes, capitate, the trapezoid, and then thumb, trapezium. You will need to be able to identify a few of these. I don't know how many for sure, but a big identifier is the hamate bone has a hook. It's an attachment point, again, for muscles or tendons, but it has a hook. So hamate, H, hook. So again, you start, and it's also on your cheat sheet, moving towards the pinky and then towards the thumb. So long to pinky, here comes the thumb. Please, on your exam, do not write that for your answers. This is what you need to write to the actual names of the bones. Now, if you want to write this on the side to help you remember, that's fine. But this acronym is not an answer. It has to be the bones themselves. Oh, here we go. Okay, here I have another picture of the humerus. I thought I had it. Again, olecranon fossa. We have the trochlea here, the capitulum. Let's see. The deltoid tuberosity, they may ask about. It's like that rigid line on your humerus. That's an attachment point for the deltoid muscle. The humerus also has a greater tubercle up here and a lesser tubercle down here. Greater and lesser tubercle, not to be confused with the greater and lesser trochanter of the femur. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the pelvic girdle. There's 3 bones that make up the 1/2 of the pelvic girdle, which is an os cox. What are those 3 bones? Ilium, ischium, and pubis. So again, we have, or humans are bipedal, which means we walk on 2 feet because of our femur and acetabulum. So we have our iliac crest, our ilium right here, our hip joint, which is our femur in our acetabulum, which you'll see in a bit, our ischium, and then our pubis. So when there's 3 bones, specifically the 2 os cox and the sacrum together, that's your pelvic girdle. If we're just looking at one side of the hip bone, that's the coxal bone or os cox. Okay, don't be scared if you just see this on the exam. It's just your pelvis broken up. You will need to know some of this anatomy. So the iliac crest, your ilium. The big thing here, it's not even labeled, is this greater sciatic notch. This can actually tell you if a pelvis belonged to a male or female. We have the ischial tuberosity here. This big hole, or it's not a hole because it's not all the way, but this is called your acetabulum. This is where the head of the femur sits and what allows you to walk. Right here, this big hole is the obturator foramen. It is important, I would know that. Let's see, we have our body of the pubis down here. And then we have our anterior superior iliac spine. So again, up here is that iliac crest. Here is the iliac spine, the superior iliac spine. And then we have the inferior iliac spine. Just terrible, right, guys? And then again, we have the ischium down here. So there's a ramus of the ischium, And then there's a ramus of the mandible. That's just like the body. It's right here. If you are asked to side a bone like this, the acetabulum has to be towards the outside. Because if this was on the inside, you would not be able to walk, right? Like if this was medial to your body, it has to be on the outside. And this part right here is called like, well, it's not called, but we call it the elephant ear. This has to be kind of sitting like this because this is where your sacrum attaches. And that's why it's like really rugged and rigid. Because it is an attachment point for the sacrum. Do I have one in here? Yeah. Like this. Something like that. There we go. Like that. So again, acetabulum will probably be asked on the exam. Okay, and then the femur, not to be confused with the humerus because it always happens. This is going to be your anterior view. Big things from here, again, the greater trochanter, the head of the femur, the body, which is just, right, the whole shaft. Your patellar surface, which is home for what bone? Patella, good. And then we have lateral and medial epicondyles. Again, one's just towards the outside, one is towards the middle. This is going to be your posterior view. One thing that is on this image that you can't really see is the fovea capitis of the femur. I don't remember if they said you'll need to identify it, but it's this little hole in the head of the femur. Again, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter. Back here we have the, again, medial and lateral epicondyles. You will be asked to cite the femur. You need to identify the anterior part and the posterior part because a lot of students are trying to cite it this way, which you can, but it's a lot harder. Whereas if you turn it anteriorly, you know that this head part has to go medial towards your body. So I know that this could not go on my right side because then this would be outside of my body. This has to belong to my left side and allow to walk. Same with this one. So on the exam, if they give you two femurs like this, some of you will try to just right and left, or I did that backwards. Here we go. They're like this. They have to go towards the inside, again, because they articulate. I don't think this is right, but like this. And then you walk. So again, my best advice is to pick up the bones. Don't be scared. That's what they're there for. And then, yeah. Again, because if you don't pick up the bones and you don't know what side it comes from, you might misidentify the medial and lateral epicondyles. Okay, some more lower body. So right underneath the femur is the tibia and fibula. Make sure you can write that out. Tibia, fibula, tibula is not real. Fibia is not real. Tibia, fibula. Say that right because now I'm confusing myself. These two articulate, and these are the bones of your lower leg. Let's see, the tibia has a really long, or not a really long, a like really rigid protrusion here. This is the tibial tuberosity. The tibia also has medial condyles and lateral condyles. The big thing to know with the tibia and fibula are the two malleolus. The tibia has a medial malleolus and the fibula has a lateral malleolus. So this is a tibia. You would need to also be able to side this. So you need to find the anterior direction. This is going to be posterior and it has like, it's pretty flat back here. Whereas in the front, it has like a almost triangular kind of shape to it. This is the part of your shin that you can feel. So you want to hold it anteriorly and look for the medial malleolus. Where should this be in your body? Towards the what? The middle. Yeah. So this should be towards the middle. So you'll just hold it to the bottom of your leg. So this is going to be my left tibia because of the medial malleolus. If I try to put it on my right, this is in the way of the fibula's lateral malleolus. Words are not real anymore. This is a very bent fibula. Fibula, they get confused for arm bones a lot. They're a lot longer than your arm bones. Try to put this in your arm, probably wouldn't work. This is going to always be lateral. The fibula specifically is one of the only bones that kind of tells you exactly what side it comes from. There's this little attachment here. If I put my thumb over it, it's on the right side. This comes from the right side of my body. But this only works for the fibula. I don't think I have a left one. You second. Oh, it's also right. So if I put my thumb over this part of the fibula, it's on the right side. So this is coming from the right side of my body. Again, tibia, fibula. They are not the same. And then again, you'll need to be able to identify the medial malleolus and lateral malleolus. Almost there. Ooh, good one. Actually, maybe. So you are going to want to know that there's this interosseous tissue or membrane between the tibia and fibula. No one has ever reported back to me that they asked about it, but it's always a possibility. I do think that was on your worksheets, right? Was it? Okay, then yeah. Okay, lastly, let's talk about, the foot bones. I have another mnemonic for this. So let's start with the bones or the tarsals. Yeah. So it's tiger cubs need milk with a C. So tiger is our talus. Cubs is our calcaneus. The calcaneus is the attachment point for your Achilles tendon. So this will come back. Make sure you know that. They'll probably ask about the calcaneus. Tiger cubs need the navicular. The navicular bone, when you take it apart, kind of looks like a little boat. So I always think navy. And then milk is going to be the medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiforms. And then the cuboid is that C. So you have 3 types of cuneiforms, and you need to write out like the whole name. So medial cuneiform, intermediate cuneiform, and then lateral cuneiform. If you just wrote lateral, it would probably be wrong. Yes. So again, tiger cubs need milk, talus, calcaneus, navicular, medial, intermediate, lateral cuneiforms, and then cuboid. What type of bones would you classify these as? Short. Good. Yeah, these are short bones. Not to be confused with your phalanges that are considered long bones, but that's just a lot. I forgot to talk about them with the hand bones, but you do have digits that are numbered. So you're always going to start with your biggest digit or just your big thumb or big toe. That's always going to be 1. So this is MT1, which is metatarsal 1, and then metatarsal 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the biggest one or your big toe or big thumb is always going to be 1. And then same thing with the hand bones, metacarpal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you have, I'm sorry, those are your metatarsals. Then you have your phalanges. These are, I never know how to say it, proximal, intermediate, and distal, or I think middle. I don't know which one the professors say. Do you remember? Anybody? Middle? Okay, yeah. So proximal is going to be closest to your metatarsals right here. Your middle phalanx is going to be in the middle, and then your distal is going to be the very tippy top. What to say? Remember that the big toe and thumb, they don't have a middle phalanx. They just have the proximal and distal. Let's see. Any questions about the foot bones or the hand bones and the metacarpals, metatarsals, phalanges? Just remember MC, MT 1 through 5, even if you have because this is a right foot, if you were to have a left foot, it would still be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we go. Is this the left? No, this is still the right. But 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's always going to be 1, no matter which side of the body it comes from. Okay. And then we have, lastly, the fetal skeleton. You are going to need to identify some of the fontanelles that come from the fetal skeleton. So number 1 is easy. It's just the anterior. Number 2, posterior. 3 is the mastoid fontanelle, which is where your mastoid process is. And then 4 is the sphenoidal fontanelle. I've also seen it just as sphenoid fontanelle, so whichever your professor talked about in lab. Yeah, this is what you'll need to identify from the fetal skeleton. And then you'll also need to know the key differences between an adult skeleton and a fetal skeleton. So what are like some major differences? More bones, yeah. So just number of bones. The big one is the presence of fontanelles, and then size of bones, or you could also say bone, what did I say yesterday? Fusion. Bone fusion in fetuses or even children happens a lot later in life than in adults. There is one thing I did not add. That's the differences between an adult and a male and female pelvis. Females have a bigger, greater sciatic notch, which again is this part here. They have a wider pubic inlet or pubic angle. Males just have a larger pelvis overall. And then females, there was one more. Oh, the pelvic brim is wider in females. Any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody want me to go take their test for them?
The condyles
Mhm.
can go for humerus,
Mhm.
femur.
Humerus, femur, and then tibia has some on the top.
But they're, because I know that it's like the trochlea and then the.
Yes. Mhm.
Those are also called medial lateral condyles or no?
Oh, on the humerus?
Yeah.
So I think it's a specific portion. So let me go back. So like the trochlea is actually I'll do it here, right here in the middle.
Yeah.
But the lateral epicondyle is this part on the side.
Condyles, like capitulum and trochlea, are those also considered condyles? Because it's epicondyle.
Yeah, they are because they're attachment points.
Yeah.
The trochlea is going to be the middle portion, and on the posterior, the capitulum is going to be on the anterior. But yeah, you are right. They are epicondyles or condyles.
So,
Yeah.
like,
Those of you in the Zoom, we do have a practice lab exam already set up in 111. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. You can email me, or I actually also did upload the practice exam to the Canvas page. So if you just scroll down to A&P 1 exam 2, lab exam 2, it's going to be there at the very bottom.